Welcome to Ming Presents The Re-Up, a conversation with the artistic mind. There you are, Mr. Wolf.
Good morning. Good afternoon out there.
You know, my wife asked me yesterday, she's like, is Steve going to be awake? I was like, how do you even know that he's such a night owl? I guess it's like infamous. You're famously...
Yeah, nocturnal. I told you I had flipped my schedule around since I've been out here, but earlier, like a few days ago, I pulled an all-nighter, and now I'm just kind of slowly dialing it back to a regular schedule again.
So you're in LA right now. Do you have? Tell me. Yeah, I know. But I like the glasses, though. It goes with
Yeah.
One of us has to look cool. I'm nice and tan and bald and all that.
No, I am not tan at all. Sorry, I'm just closing this curtain a little bit. I'm getting washed out. So
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So how's things? So you're out in LA.
I'm out in LA. I don't know if you can hear. There's a little dog like trying to get my attention, pushing a ball towards me. Yeah, I'm out in LA. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, everything is great.
Cool. I'm in LA. I'm with my girl, our dog. I flew out here the beginning of April, just as New York was kind of about to peak. And at the time, it felt much better out here, and now it's kind of like flipped. So there's a bunch of nonsense out here. And
are you thinking about coming? Is Blunted Boss your girl?
Yeah.
All right, there we go. I see she's showing. What's up, Blunted Boss? Nice to meet you.
Her name's Melody, but spelled I-E with the German spelling of Melody.
So is she out? Is she LA?
Yeah.
So you went out to her place in LA to kind of like just peace out of New York and just be like, let me go somewhere safe. And now LA's turned into a,
Well, I was going to be out here anyway because when I was out here for NAMM, I usually stay with our friend Lukash out here.
Yeah.
A place.
Which is Dr. Luke for anybody who doesn't know Dr. Luke's name.
Yeah. So I usually crash with him when I'm out here. But when I was out here for NAMM, I moved a bunch of my LA stuff to her place. So the plan was, I've kind of been bi-coastal on the DL for I don't know how many years now. And so now I was going to be back and forth. I was going to be here for all of April. That was the plan. But then when all this shit started happening, it was like, all right, I just got a one-way ticket this time and figured, just like you said, like peace out New York.
Yeah.
Ride it out here. But that was also when they were saying, yeah, a couple months, flatten the curve, everything goes back to normal, and that's clearly not what's happening. So yeah, I'm just out here. She and I will both end up back at my place in New York at some point, but I don't know when that's going to be. So
yeah. I mean, it's funny because New York is. I'm in Sag Harbor, so I'm not. We pieced out of the city, and I haven't gone back. I moved my studio out of the city. I have it in a small place here, which I'm doing this from. And we have kids, so our next thought is what's really going to happen with school in the fall, and we can only stay out in this place until I would say, till it gets really cold out and the kids can't go outside. It's not worth being out because we're on the water, so it'd be freezing cold and not good for the kids. And it's a small place, so we'll move back to the city at some point. The curve has flattened in New York. It is, but I hear people are being stupid like they are everywhere else, not wearing masks and
that's what I heard. That's what I heard too. It sounds like New York is about to experience like what LA has been experiencing, because LA was doing really well, and once they decided to like open certain things up, people just lost their minds. And like we'll take the dog to the park on the weekend, and it's like the first weekend where they made the announcement. It was like people just wanted to pretend that like this shit's not happening, and like the basketball courts were mobbed. Nobody had masks on. People were barbecuing. There was like a brass band out there doing like a little concert. Like clearly not masked because they're playing brass, and all their friends and family are hanging out. And yeah, it was just
they're actively spraying them.
Yeah, they're spit out of their. Yeah, exactly. It was just like the Twilight Zone. So yeah. It's so like we don't really go out much. We hit Whole Foods once a week, and aside from walking the dog, I barely and the weekly Whole Foods trip. I'm pretty much here 24/7, and I have like a little programming rig set up. And
let's talk about that because I think you've been a very for as long as I've known you, you've been I think ahead of what most drummers and professional drummers, you kind of always could see the next phase You know, you obviously you've played on a million great records, physically played on a million great records. And then, you know, kind of as hip hop and mainstream music converged, you were really on top of programming and understanding that, yeah, like I can play any of this. I can come in the studio and I can come and be Steve Wolf on the drums if you want me to look cool. Or and then you're going to put everything to the click track, and it's going to be on a grid, and you're going to quantize my thing if it's slightly off, or I'm going to or you're going to quantize it, and so you started programming, and for Fred and I, like knowing you, we were like, oh, that guy's really hip because he knows he's not precious about. He's an amazing drummer, but not precious about programming, because you know how some musicians during that time really had an issue with programmed anything. When you're like, yeah, but I'm still a human being programming it.
Yeah.
Right. So talk about that transition. Talk about how is that probably the first part of your programming history where you went from drums into programming and then, you know, doing.
Actually, it started before that. It's just it didn't really become. So I want to back up a little bit. So like when I was in high school, I'm pretty sure I'm older than you.
I'm 48. I have no problem.
Okay, yeah, I'm 52. So
we both look good, so I don't give a fuck.
Exactly, yeah. Although I definitely have some more salt and pepper in here than you. So.
I know, but my hair was gone before yours.
That's true, but we have the same haircut now.
I know.
Yeah.
That's because there's too many brains. It just pushes the hair away eventually.
Exactly.
I have a theory. It's also something that gets us to settle down, right? Yeah. So you know.
Yeah. But yeah, so like I was hard and like you and Fred also were guys that were like multi-instrumentalists, take, you know, the not necessarily acoustic instrument because you played electric instruments, but not electronics, you know what I mean?
Right,
you got
right.
The real actual instrument where you're creating a sound in the instrument, but you guys were also turntable culture programming. And so, and I don't know what it was like for you, but for me, all of my stuff, it wasn't, oh, the work is going there. It was just organic. I grew up, like, I was like transcribing like a bunch of fusion and straight ahead jazz records and like hard, like going hard as a drummer into that world. But I was also like listening to the radio. And when I was a junior high, they didn't even call it hip hop yet, but it was like, you know, rap was becoming a thing. And most of that was programmed, and then sampling became a little bit more of that. Because the early shit, it wasn't even samplers. Then sampling kind of started to go on top of the drum machines or just replace them. And so yeah, and it wasn't just hip hop. It was the R&B of that time. It was a lot of stuff that was heavily programmed. So and then Prince, which was mainstream, but like the Lindrum was such a sound of when he really like hit his tipping point with mass popularity, like the Purple Rain record. Like the detuned side stick on the Lindrum, to me, that was just a part of, if you want to be making records that sound relevant, you need that sound. So I remember, like, I had a bunch of day jobs. So, like, I was washing cars, I was working at Baskin Robbins, and, yeah, so I just remember, like, anytime I got some money, I was, like, saving up and getting some shit for my acoustic kit. And then also, I bought the first, you remember Simmons drums?
Yeah, of course.
So they made the first self-contained Simmons. It was an SDS-1, I believe, and it was just a single drum, and it had like a little, like the brains on the corner, and an EEPROM chip. And it was called like an EEPROM blower to like put the sound on the chip, and that's the same technology the Lindrums had. And so it came stock with like you had your choice of a few different Simmons drum sounds. And I remember going to this music shop, Medley Music, just outside of Philly, and I asked one of the drum guys, what's that sound from the Prince records? And he's like, that's a detuned side stick from a Lindrum machine. We have a Lindrum machine in the store here. I can make you that sound. So when I was gigging with a fusion band, and I was also gigging with like an R&B pop band with actually Dorn played bass, Billy Mann. I don't know if you're friends with Billy.
I never knew. It's funny because the circles in New York and, you know, just wherever, it's like the same circles. Billy's name has come up a million times.
Yeah.
You know, like, so I was never anything with Billy, but, you know, like we all know the same people.
But yeah, so this was in Philly, and there was another guy, Clay Sears, who's like, was kind of now part of the Adam Blackstone crew, but was part of the Roots crew. And there was just a bunch of heavy, like, but we were all kids at the time. And so I remember we were playing like local battles of the bands and like proms and whatever. And I had my, like, for the fusion gigs, I had my big double bass, I Want to Be Billy Cotton kit. And then for for like the covers gigs, it was like a 4-piece kit with the Simmons pad right under my hi-hat, so I could like catch those sounds. And and then I bought like a poor man's Lin. I couldn't afford a Lin drum at the time, so I got this Yamaha RX 15 or 21, I forget which model number. And it was just, I learned to do basic programming because I remember hearing when I was like, I remember scooping ice cream at Baskin Robbins, and I heard like Sucker MCs on the radio for the first time.
Right.
And I was like, man, I know that's not a real drum set. I love the way that sounds. I want to be able to make like these kinds of beats. And I was experimenting with production by taking 2 boom boxes and just bouncing, not even with cables, just like pressing play and having the other boombox recording while I would play along with like my drum machine track playing through the speakers and just overdubbing. If friends left guitars or basses at my house, I would just play some like rudimentary shit.
So yeah, I would do the same exact thing with an R8 drum machine where I would reamp it through a guitar amp.
Yeah.
Well, this was in high school.
Yeah.
And I would play it through the guitar amp and then re-record it into my 4-track because I love the way that the drums got bombastic.
And I ended up getting an R8. That was my first really good drum machine. This was like after I dropped out of Berkeley, and I swapped out like my gigantic Fusion drum kit to the same store I bought it from. And I walked out. I like walked in there with like a carload of drums and walked out with an R8 and like 2 of those expansion cards. And
I remember that the R8 was like I loved. There was a certain set of drums in the R8 that I really, really loved.
Yeah,
and it didn't have all of the sounds that I was looking. You know, like you, I was doing the same thing. I was really into early hip hop and really into like also into industrial music. So an R8 was great for industrial electronic music, the predecessor to like techno and all that. Yeah. And so I was really into Skinny Puppy and 9 Inch Nails and 242, and those were the sounds of those bands.
They had some big ass kicks and snares on there. That was those sounds, and even some of like the early like New Jack Swing inspired R&B stuff on the radio was also clearly like there was certain. I'll still hear records from that era, and I'll be like, that's an R8 snare drum. So give me 1 second. I'm here. I'm just gonna hit the AC.
No worries. I've had that before. Is it hot there today? Because today it's nice and cool out. We have a nice breeze going on, and
it's a little hot.
You know what? And again, it sounds like we've all kind of had a similar. Well, it's the love of the music, right? You're a drummer. I was a guitar player. It was the love of the music. It was to be able to make the music. One thing that it's funny when you talk about. I don't know how to explain this or talk about it. I never cared about. I don't care as a producer about anything except the end result. Yeah. I don't care how you make it. I don't care how the sound is generated. I don't care if you have to play every single note with one finger and you make an amazing production. Yeah. My concern is the end result. So, there are guys who play guitar better than me. There are people who play, drums better than I can program, whatever. But as long as my productions sound the right way, I'm happy. And one of the things that I always hated about the Roots when they first started, you brought up the Roots a little bit earlier, I couldn't stand that Questlove's drum sounds. I loved him as a drummer, but his needing to use that weird pitched up kick and snare, I hated it. I was like one of the things I could not stand about the Roots. And years later, I heard him talking about how he was like, had this thing about how it has to sound like live drums. It has to sound like live drums. And at some point, one day he woke up and was like, what am I talking about? It just has to sound like how I want it to sound. Yeah. And he started changing the drum sounds. Yeah. And like, that's a weird thing for me, that kind of sort of purist mentality, which is like, well, if it's got to, I've never really had that.
Yeah. I dig that sound, but I also dig when he plays with like a fat, like loose snare, but I hear what you're saying with that, and the Precious thing. Like I was never like that, and I remember when I started touring, because I was getting session work here and there, but it wasn't until I stopped touring, like I just made the decision I'm not touring, and I know the phone's not going to ring as much for session work, but eventually when people know I'm in town, it'll start picking up. Yeah. But when I was touring, like as soon as I could afford it, I bought like a pad controller and triggers for my kick and snare and like individual pads like around my acoustic kit, so I could really, now it's called hybrid drumming, and it's like a marketing term like that like Roland uses, and because it's ubiquitous now. Well, not now, nobody's touring, but up until a few months ago, any drummer with the mainstream act on tour is going to have like a Roland SPD, like, the new Octopad. Like at least one with their kit, and like they all have like the laptop to the side, and that's just part of the thing with mixing the. But back in the day, there were only a handful of doing it. But so I like the idea of playing an acoustic kit, but being trigger the electronic sounds to layer my kick and snare. So if I were playing with the big artist and their latest, it was programmed, then I would just get like the masters and get a sample of the kick and the snare, programmed snare from that track song. Either my tech or I would, it's like at the time I was using Drum Cat, and I later couldn't stand that thing and switched to Roland, but we would just advance the Cat, and there would be like a new kit and a different kick and snare that I'm triggering with my acoustic kick and snare, and then the front of house guy has, or girl, that has like, you know, my acoustic kick mics and then the triggers for each song. And I like the idea of I'm still playing an acoustic kit, but I can kind of augment the sounds, and then also tune. I would choose specific cymbals because it's like, well, these hats sound a little more 909-ish to me, so I'll use these because they. And so I was doing that, and then once I shifted out of that, because people will hit me up now, I'll get like emails from old drummer friends who are still touring. They're like, "Yo, man, what are you using these days?" I'm like, "I don't use anything. If I'm playing drums, I'm just playing drums because it's all in the studio. How I'm getting the sound. Why am I gonna like try and like tweak the fuck out of my drum kit when I can just use an 808 or 909 kit and program it?" So that's kind of where I'm at now. It's all a mixture. I have no qualms about beat detecting my live drums, and I'll do records where in the pre-production I'll use addictive drums, which we've talked about before, to get and I can program a very convincing like sound acoustic drum part, but that's all in addictive drums, and then like after that, and I'll also have all the electronic shit that's happening, like programming that's supposed to sound electronic. And then once the rest of the music is done, and then we'll go back, the producer might say, okay, let's mic up your live kit, replace the addictive drum stuff, and keep like the electronic shit, and then we'll beat detect it and line up all of your acoustic drums. And then once all that's done, we'll A/B it. And sometimes it's a really expensive process for the producer to do that because we're in like an expensive studio with a great engineer and spending a few hours on that. And then we'll A/B the addictive drums part and then the detected on the grid. And it's 50-50. Like sometimes we'll be like, the addictive drums just sounds better, and we're kind of used to that because we built the record on top of that. And I have no ego about, just lose my acoustic drums and go back to the addictive drums. So I
feel like, once you spend the time programming the drums properly, and texturally, you're, as a producer, you're adding instruments and you're EQing and mixing as you go along, and you're doing all this stuff. That if you program the drums properly to begin with, it's really hard to outplay them. I think in a lot of ways, if you program them properly. I mean, addictive drums, like when I had called Steve, I don't know, a couple of years ago to ask, like, what are you using for your drum sounds these days? Because, we all have the same electronic stuff, but I really wanted another level of acoustic drums. And luckily the addictive drums full package, whatever that was on like 50% off. So I just bought the entire thing. Yeah. And, when I produce rock bands, that's primarily what I'm using to program. And it always sounds real to me. Always. Yeah. Like you can, I just feel like records are records. They have a sound of what you're making, and there's just like, unless you're doing a lot of rock timing changes that require a band to be gelled together and really play, because it's very strange time changes, which is it takes forever to program. Like that's a different thing, but in general, if you're doing something that's relatively close to the grid, even if you speed up just before the chorus to have the chorus be a BPM or two faster, and you do all that programming, once you record on top of it, it just sounds dynamic.
The real difference for me, and this is when we opt to go with a live version, even if it's so close, there's something about the air, because
I was going to say the air.
With addictive drums, you've got, it's like a virtual, for people who haven't used it, it's like looking at a virtual desk, and you've got your overheads and you've got your rooms, and you can make it sound like it's a real drummer playing a full kit, like as an instrument, as opposed to like like very isolated sounds. But the truth is at the end of the day, when you're playing a real kit, you're going to get sympathetic vibrations from every part of the kit to every other part of the kit. And there's something with that, like that mesh. And with certain tracks, it just feels better because sonically the sound, it's subtle, and for a lot of people's ears, they won't even pick up on it. But like you or I would definitely hear the difference. It's like, yeah, it's like the instrument is breathing as an instrument in this chorus, and it just lacks that with the addictive drums. So, but again, it's a subtle thing.
Well, I think it's subtle if you don't do all the parts that need to be done. Sorry, I take that back. One of the things that I think young drummers don't know, and young producers and young musicians don't know, is that if a drum kit is tuned for that recording, it makes a tremendous difference, right? If everything is tuned for the key of the recording, you're going to get this harmonic vibration that happens with the drum kit. And then that gives a resonance that makes the whole recording. It's sort of like adding the analog vibration to but most drummers don't have that wherewithal to change the tunings between each track, or they don't, like, if they're going into the studio to say, let's say, cut 12 songs, they don't say and look at the key of all 12 of those songs and be like, okay, I can do these 5 songs in this key, these 3 songs in this, right? I mean, that's a lot for a drummer to take on and tune all the right. So. But as a producer, I do think about that because I'm programming all the time. So I'm putting my kick and snare in key, and then obviously my ears hear the hi-hats and the cymbals, which I don't think of being in key, but they do have. They do sound better if you tune them to the right.
So there's that, and I do that, and even like, I'll just give this because it's probably the most well-known example of a record where I did this on. It was with Luke. Wrecking Ball by Miley Cyrus. It's a really basic, to me, dubstep inspired sounds for the chorus, but it's just kick, snare, kick, snare. That's it. And there's no drums in the verse. And it was already programmed, and he was like, hey, I just want to like fatten the sound a little bit, and I just wanted like you to record a live acoustic kit, but like a big Bonham-sized kit. And then that's going to be like the air on top of the samples, and it's the kind of thing where when you listen to it, you're not necessarily noticing the acoustic drums, but if you muted them in the mix, you notice that it's gone, and it's a different air than just putting reverb on the samples. So, but even though I knew I wasn't using tom, I had these big ass like 14-inch rack toms, 16 and 18 floor tom, and I tuned them to either a root or a fifth of the track. So when I'm hitting this big boomy kick and this big cracking snare drum, you're hearing the whole kit like vibrate in unison harmonically. And so that stuff makes a difference. But even with addictive drums, I'll get in there and I'll do the same thing. I'll dial all of the samples, so it's the same thing I would do on an acoustic kit. But the difference is, and again, it's a subtle thing, it's all those drums, the samples will be ringing in the same key, but there's not the same kind of unison where literally the sound of each drum and the cymbals a bit with acoustic drums changes because everything's vibrating with everything else.
Well, they're resonating. I think it's interesting that they haven't put that parameter in yet, because there is, well, first of all, I think the next level, let's say, of addictive drums or something like that should be auto-tuned, meaning you select the key of the drums, it tunes them automatically, and then it adds the sympathetic resonance. That would be the next level.
Well, that's the thing, and they try to do that. And if you've messed with like a latest the last how many years with the Roland V drum brain, you can dial in like snare buzz, sympathetic snare buzz on the kick and the toms if you want, and it's getting closer and closer. And they'll do things where they'll have an envelope where like a velocity envelope where like the harder velocity you choose whatever sound, then it'll change the pitch, because that'll happen if you dig into it.
Because you hit it, it goes up slightly out of tune, because that's what it is.
They're doing ways that it's trying to be like a virtual model of that, but until that's there, that's the one thing that like you need to be actually like creating a sound from vibrations from scratch with the kit in the room. But
someone asked, how do you tune your? He's saying, how do you guys tune your drums? And you answer and I'll answer, because you're also
okay.
I'm not tuning acoustic kits. So let me just back up one time. So also, I recently did a record. I think it was last summer. I actually at Mission Sound and we used your drums and they were just and I was thank you very much. But yeah, I love that your drums comes full circle. I've known Steve for a very long time, and I just happened to be at a studio which has a great sound with good analog gear, and they were like, "Oh, by the way, this is Wolf's drums," and I was like, "Of course they are." And you have your house, your drums, but they sounded great and they were tuned nicely and they really so talk about acoustic tuning and then talk about electric tuning, and I'll tell you how I tune my stuff.
Okay, so with acoustic drums, I'm pretty basic. Now they have all these like artisanal like muffling products for like, and some of the stuff's really beautifully built and really high end. I just use duct tape and paper towels for muffling. Like I don't get into any of the fancier shit. And so the first thing I do is just a selection process. So like if you can go to the right cymbals and the right snare, it's now kicks and toms matter, but it's the snare is at the very center of like the ear's range. So the snare is really the sound you want to dial in, and it's the backbeat. It's happening for most popular music. It's happening every 2 and 4 of every bar. So the ear, just like vocals, like really goes to the snare. So the snare just. And I used to be one of those guys that when I first started getting endorsements and had a lot of gear, I would show up to a session with like every size and every kind of material snare. And then eventually I was like, there are these like the workhorse. I call them the Strats and the Les Pauls of snare drums, or like the Ludwig 5x14 and the Ludwig 6.5x14 metal shell drum. And the most ubiquitous one is the Superphonic, which is aluminum with a chrome plating. But like Mike Caffrey, who's an engineer I used to do a lot of shit with, I told him for this one session, I was like, he had a shallow one, but I was like, you need to buy the 6.5, like I call it the Bonham snare. He's the most famous guy to use that snare, the 6.5 version. And he bought the Acrolite, which is the student model that doesn't have the chrome plating. And I was like, man, this actually records better because it's like just a little drier. It still has that aluminum shell sound. But so basically now all I bring, or if I'm using backline or using this studio house shit, I just bring out 2 snares, those 2 snares. The Ludwig aluminum 5x14 and 6.5x14. And if I can't, I'm not too precious about that. If I can't get that, then I'll like a Ludwig Black Beauty, which is the same. Basically, they're all the same model snare with that bead in the center, but it's brass or aluminum or chrome over brass or nickel over brass. But it's basically, the shallow one to me is a Strat, the deeper one is a Les Paul. And it's
That's funny because I'm sitting right behind me is my Fender Strat, which I use, or behind there, which I use on almost every single record. It's when you learn how to play one instrument very well, all of the sounds come out of it. You know what needs to be modified, right? So having all of that stuff is sometimes a hindrance because you have to, you don't know enough about each one.
Yeah, and just like with guitars, now there's a bunch of Strat and Les Paul knockoffs by other brands. And same thing with every major drum manufacturer makes their version of like those snares. So I just use that and like just choosing the right one. Like the drum version of do I want humbuckers or single coils for this? So I'll choose that, and then I'll dial that in, and I always tune to either a root or a fifth of the drum. And the thing with drums is because it's 2 heads, sometimes you're going to get like vibrations where there's a harmonic overtone aside from the main thing. So you got to just dial all that stuff in, decide how much muffling I'm using, how much I want to loosen the snares up so you're getting snare buzz. And that's the main thing. And then I'll tune the toms. I'm not going to get too technical. There actually is a harmonic interval between the bottom head and the top head that will give you like the best, like most resonant sound. But that's like real drum nerdy shit. So I'll just say I get everything dialed in where I want them. I choose the right cymbals, but like by weight and diameter, and that's pretty much it. And then it's like working with an engineer like Oliver at Mission, who I trust, who like will get me the sound, because it's not, once you get the kit sound, it's like, okay, but how do we want to like mic these and process these? And so like I'll always be like, oh, we're going for Bonham, or we're going for Back in Black, or we're going for like Motown, or we're going for like 70s Don Henley Eagles, more like drier, tighter sound, whatever it is. Like I can reference the sound and he'll know like where to place the mics, which mics to use, and like how we're gonna like process that shit.
Yeah. So Karsh Calais just joined, by the way, and he said I like the drum nerdy shit. By the way, Karsh, I want to have you on the re-up. So let's talk after this. Your name has come up a number of times, so I want to make sure you get on here.
Cool. All right.
So also, do you, with your acoustic set and tuning, Do you ever take the bass? Well, because it's going to be an acoustic bass generally, but in electronics, I have we'll talk about too. But the way that I tune my kick and snare also have to do with where the bass is going to sit.
Well, that's for sure, but that's not to take it a step like beyond that is like what I play with my kick drum. Once I got more into production and became more aware of the bigger picture, that if like it's rare. Producer's gonna have to really not beg me, but just insist that I play a busy kick drum pattern, because most things I just feel like the kick drum is stepping all over everything else, and I can imply if there's a certain syncopated feel they want, I can apply that with ghost notes on the snare or with something else. But there would have, like when I was younger and I would start doing sessions, if the bass guitar, especially if it's like a real bass, or like a synth bass but is a pretty big sound, I would be doubling it, and I might be boom 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 boom.
Right, you would be busy.
Yeah, and it's just like fighting with the bass's frequency. So now I'll just be boom tap boom got boom boom, whatever it is. I'll be like, okay, what are the essential like pushes and like grounding kick drums that I need in there, and then I leave everything else out. And it's also like I will generally muffle my kick drum, and I'll dig the beater into it when I need that like thud, and it like, as opposed to like wanting to like feather the kick and have it like ring and stay open and have like the kick tuned to a note like I'm playing bebop or something. It's very different. But yeah, for most stuff that's not that, I'm going for a relatively dead kick sound, and also like leaving a lot of space with my kick parts.
I think now that electronic music has made really its way subsonically into pop music, and a lot of the records you're probably working on and have been working on the last 10 years, that balance between that thick sub bass that's often used, even the trap bass, 808 bass, and then the kick drum, like you said, it needs to have a punch to it, but it doesn't need that big boomy tone that it used to have, because the sub bass is in the way now.
Exactly.
And if you think about like a group like Metallica or a metal band where that bass sound was really sort of up mid bass, much more higher up in register, because the kick started to like take up all that room, that lower sub frequency, and so the bass is almost like this weird non-bassy instrument in rock and metal. But now that things are in pop music, you have this very full frequency spectrum, very tight low end, subby, tight drums, very tight snare, very programmed hi-hats, and then the vocals have all this room. I think there's a lot of programming techniques that are important. It's people are always like, why does when you program rock drums, why do they sound real? And when you and so that's something I get into a lot with people in terms of getting the right balance between those items.
What's up, Mark?
For me, so do you use anything? So probably the person was asking, how do you specifically tune the drum? Do you use a kind of tuner, or do you use an EQ?
No, just use your ear and a key. And I never started with this interval, but eventually, like one day I was like, let me just see what the interval is. And it's basically my resonant head is going to be a minor third above the batter head. And then each head has to be uniform. So like what you'll do is, if I'm using, and I love single-headed toms. When I was young, I was like, oh, that's corny. And the older I got, I was like, no, single-headed toms are the shit. They have that bark. And whether it's like that Phil Collins gated single-headed toms, or if it's more like just a really funky, like the drum fill at the beginning of the Commodore's Brick House. I'm pretty sure those are single-headed toms.
Yeah.
But if what I'll do is, if it's double-headed tom, you mute one head, and then you just go around the rim and you tap very lightly, like so you can. And I learned this from playing timpani when I was a kid, because now timpani has like a pedal where you have gears, and depending on where you are on the gear, you can pre-configure the drum to go like to a bunch of different notes. Because if you're playing in a symphonic piece, you're gonna have you can't have 12 timpani around you. You only have so many drums, so you have to make changes as the song changes. So. And I remember, but back in the day, like you used a pitch pipe and your ear and like twist like knobs to tune timpani. So that's how I learned to do that. And so you do the same thing with your acoustic toms. You tap around by each lug, and then you'll know if you need to go up or down. And then every drum kind of has a sweet spot within a range. That's why I said I'll either tune to a root or a fifth of the key of the song. And I just do that because any other note can kind of end up stepping on it depending if the chords change. But a root and a fifth, you're basically safe.
Yeah.
So, and so if that tom sweet spot is like too far away from the fifth, then I choose the root, or vice versa. And then I'll dial, and then I'll go to the resonant, and I'll usually start with the I guess I don't know. I usually start with the bottom head, with the resonant head. And already being able to hear a minor third above, like oh no, that's actually not true. The note you're hearing really is the resonant head. When you're hitting it, you're getting the attack of the batter head, but I'm really dialing the note in with the resonant head. Snare's a little different because snare, I just crank the fuck out of the bottom head, and I just get it so it's like very tight, and then I dial the sound in with the top head with the snare. And then also with the snares, with the snare buzz, because that will affect like even where you're hearing the drum ring. And then that's with acoustic drums. And the kick is also like a different animal. Like I said, if I'm doing something with an open kick, I'll do the same thing, full front head. But usually I don't even have a front head on the kick, or there's a big hole cut out of it, and it's more of a punch. And I'll just dial it into where it feels good, and like literally feels good, where like it just feels right with my beater hitting the drum.
Yeah.
And then there are times where you want a little bit of a wrinkle on the head with the kick. Toms and snares, unless I'm going for like just a real like warbly effect, I will make sure that the head has a uniform pitch to it. And then earlier I was mentioning like with muffling, like duct tape. If I need more than duct tape, I fold up a paper towel and put it under the duct tape.
My favorite is always the wallet or no wallet. Someone takes out their wallet. They take out the leather wallet, put it on there, and then that's always the best sound. You just tape that thing on there. That's
to me when I'm just kind of recreating with enough like folded paper towel. And I haven't used a wallet for years. Like it's basically a business card case and it just has a credit card and like
right.
Yeah. But like I'll use it if like Oliver at Mission, sometimes he'll just come out when he sees me pulling out the paper towel, and he'll just pull out his wallet and he'll put on the snare for me. But anyway, that's acoustic drums. With electronic drums, like I was using an MPC for most of my, like by the time I was in New York and getting more session work, it was MPC 3000 for years. And that was easy to just, I would either do 16 levels with pitch and find the note, or I would just like tune the individual pad with the main data wheel. But I haven't touched an MPC in years, so I'll pitch, if I'm programming on the grid and just importing sounds, I use Serato Pitch and Time. Because I'm working in Pro Tools, and I like it better than Avid's pitch plugin. And then if I'm using something like Battery or Addictive Drums, then they all have their own, it's as simple as just like dialing.
Yeah. Well, what I do technically, I have none of the acoustic skills that you have, none whatsoever. And when I did that session, Mario McNulty and I think it was Oliver, Mario engineered the session, and Oliver set up the drums and all that, and they took care of it. And it sounded monstrous. But for me, with electronic drums, I find it snare is very easy because it's easy to find the resonant frequency, and you bounce up and down in octaves and try depending on what the snare is. And I do the same thing, root or fifth. Usually for the snare, it's usually the root for me. Yeah. And then on the kick, sometimes I have trouble subsonically hearing what the pitch is because they're so low. It's not like a rock kick. So I'll do one of two things. I will use three different methods. The first one is I'll take the kick and I'll pitch it up an octave so I can hear it as a note. And I'll just do it, and then I'll try to tune it ear-wise as a note that I'm hearing against a piano note. So that's what I'll do. Because a lot of kicks have movement in them. They do this thing where it's like but very quickly. So it starts on one note, which might not be the root, and ends on another note. So I want to find the balance there, and then I'll pitch it back down that octave so that I know what key that's in. And then I will move, like you're saying in Battery, like a plus or minus 1 or 2, depending on the key, right? Yeah. And the other way I do that is I'll use FabFilter's EQ with the keyboards. You can look at the frequencies, and they have like a keyboard set up on the bottom, and you can look at the resonant frequency of the kick, and you can see the peak. So what I'll do is I'll look to say, okay, oh look, that's a C sharp or that's a D. You know, that's happening, and it freezes on that. So I'll use the FabFilter EQ to do that. And then the last way I'll do it to double and triple check after I do all of my drums is I will take out any musical instruments and I will use, what is it? Sorry, I'm not going to. Mixed in Key has a plugin that will tell you the key of the song that you're working on by putting on the output bus. Yeah. And I'll just let the drums play and see what notes come up on Mixed in Keys plugin just to make sure that my ears haven't tricked me or whatever. Or there's a weird tone that's in there that I made a mistake. And so those are the three things that I do to dial in electronic drums. Then the kick, where that will sit, will be either depending on what's going on with the bass. So the key of the song will depend, do I use the root or where the kick sits? Because, you know, you only want to go down to D. I think it's D1 in electronic music with the sub bass, because below that, people's speakers can't really handle it. Yeah. So if I've got, let's say, if D1 is the sub bass, then my kick is not going to be D1. It's going to be above that. So that's what I tend to do, is put the kick in a place that's not going to conflict with the sub bass, and then, you know, so sometimes I'll even do the drums and have to go back and change them because the keys, I'm like, oh, I didn't pay attention to the key.
Yeah, I was going to say something else I should add is usually when I'm programming, not an acoustic thing, but if I'm doing anything that's like electronic sounds, excuse me, I will layer sounds. So, and it's kind of the same concept as when you're, you know, in the studio. With the real kick, you usually have a mic inside the kick, a mic in front, and then you'll have like the sub bass, and then you'll also be getting kick feeding into like the overheads and rooms. So when I'm layering samples, whether it's like a punchy 909 or just like an old slice from like an old record, whatever it is, I'll try to like find sounds that complement each other. So like I'm getting some one sound is just for the punch. Yeah, I'll even put like a DS10, or you can use whatever transient thing you want, but I like the XLN DS10 transient tool, and I'll just make it so it's just punch. And then if there's another sound that's more of that woof I want, then I'll let that one breathe a little more. I might even add some breath to it with the transient going the other way, and then something. Occasionally, you'll run into phase issues when you're stacking kick samples, and then I think it was Mario actually who showed me how to like cancel like the phase issues with that.
It's funny, like you're still there's so many good kick plugins now, like the Nicky Romero Kick 2 with where you can do the click and you can do I don't even mess with. I mean, I have my battery samples and I have a ton of like kicks that have been sampled off of records. I just use that and I'll just dial in and EQ those. I don't even bother with it because I'm like, these are in phase. I'm going to deal with it. I don't really care that much, and I'll just. You know, ultimately when a song is produced well, you start to like, you're the drummer, so you have to look at those details. But like I'm looking at the whole holistic thing, and I'm like, I'll get rid of the high end of that kick because I'm going to be having, you know, like the snare is going to, you know, whatever. But, you know, that's all interesting stuff. Let's talk a little bit about, we just totally nerded out on tuning drums for like 20 minutes. This is the most technical one I've ever done. I love it. Let's talk a little bit about the records you've been working on and how that's changed during this time. For us, studio guys, like, you know, obviously you were playing on a lot of drums, but because you've been programming so much that, you know, for me, I'm still in business because I'm a band in the box to begin with. How are you, talk about how, you know, records are coming in for you and then the process for you to program, and then what are people asking for from you, like how are you doing it so that people have an understanding of kind of how the modern drum programming thought process goes on.
I'm gonna grab some water. Give me 1 second because I'm like coughing way too much.
you got a hairball, Steve. It's like you got that little dog now. Now you have hair in the back of your throat.
Oh man, I've never had a dog before. This is the first time.
I would have thought, you know, you with all your stuff, you would have been like madly allergic to dogs or cats or something like that, and you know.
I'm very allergic to cats, except for Abyssinian cats. Dogs. Our dog is a mutt, but he's mostly hypoallergenic, and he looks like, it's funny, he looks like a little wolf, and his name is Lobo. Which, for people who don't know, Lobo is wolf in Spanish, but totally coincidental. My girls had this dog for years.
Random. You're becoming like a regular, normal person. It's a little strange, you know, in your older age. Just like normal hours, normal, like relatively normal girlfriend. You have a dog now.
And it's like there's light coming in here. There's wallpaper. Like
I like it. She's
I
good
call
for
you
you.
Aaron or Ming? I don't know what.
I don't know, whatever. It doesn't matter
Okay,
to me.
So yeah, but like Ming's been to my place in New York. It's like a cave, and it's like it's not just a cave. It's like a cave. Like the walls and ceiling are like a faux finish, like metallic, like antique gold.
It's like walking into a rock video from the '80s. It's just bizarre. It's like I love it. It's Wolf. It is what it is, but it's very man cave.
It's man cave, but it's like
it's like goth man cave.
Yeah, it's well decorated because like I don't have regular lights. I have like Moroccan lanterns hanging with blue light bulbs in them. It's just and like a big statue of Shiva, and like it's just it's like anyway. So that's the vibe. Here it's a very different vibe out here. So yeah, I have definitely flipped a lot of things.
Do you think when you guys move back to New York, she'll like, help you bring some color into your life and like change that up a little bit so she's not suffocating?
We're treating it like my spot in New York is our New York apartment. Her spot out here is our LA apartment. And like we decorate, like this is her place. It's been, she's got a great eye. Like we respect each other's styles, aesthetics, but like very different. So like the New York place stays the way the New York place is. Her place out here stays the way it is. And it's cool, but yeah. So I'm mildly allergic to Lobo, but not that bad. But I've been around other dogs where I just like my eyes are all puffy. It's a little bit out here, a little bit.
Okay. So let's talk about like the modern rec, like how that's coming around and like just the process, because I think people will be interested in that.
So yeah,
and you do a lot of work for Luke, so that's very
Well, I was gonna say like I don't do as much work for him because when he first moved out here. He signed a bunch of his inner circle who had been working with him up until then to his publishing production company, and I opted to not do that. And so at that point he was like, well, he didn't really need me to be programming on anything because at that point he had everybody in-house programming. He can program, and unless it was a really specific thing, like he did have me tweak some programming on some Benny Blanco stuff, like when Benny became his like main guy. But generally for a while, he would either throw me remix work and I would do remixes of singles, or he would, like Wrecking Ball, like he's like, hey, I want you to add some like acoustic drums to this track. So, but it was less and less acoustic drums. And now what I'll do for him is like it's more on the production end of thing where he'll send me something. He'll say, listen to this. What are you hearing here? And then, or like I've been helping him with, I don't even know if I'm supposed to talk about what the project is, but it's not a traditional like, hey, play on this track, but it's more of like a general like.
Yeah, you're working on production. You're helping him with the sonic ideas. I get that. It's cool. I mean,
it's not, but there's a whole separate thing that we're doing with drum programming, but it's not for a specific record. It's just kind of developing a thing, and so there's that. But as far as like day-to-day like sessions that I'm doing, it's especially since the lockdown started, I'm only programming only because I can't like set up a kit in the apartment here. And even though there is a place out here that's kind of like what Mission is, because that kit in Mission is not even my kit. It's my kit because I use it all the time. So there's a place out here where in Burbank that's pretty easy to get to, where the guy, same thing. It's like you walk in and a bunch of drums I've played are there and live there. And just like Oliver, who's a drummer, the Charlie who owns this studio is a drummer originally. He's a great engineer. So like when it's a little safer to just be in a room with other people, I'll take some sessions out there. But so far, the handful of things that people have hit me up to do acoustic drums on, I refer to friends that have home studio, like high-end home studio.
Yeah.
Like my friend, do you know Near? You remember Near Z?
I don't know.
He's like the lone Israeli drummer in Nashville, but he's like running shit. Like he was just on the Cover Mountain drummer. He's one of like the most working guys in Nashville, and he has a studio in his. He also works in like all the Nashville studios, but he has a really nice home studio. So like I'll refer shit to him all the time, and so I'm just programming here, and I have a laptop version of my desktop like Pro Tools rig in New York out here, and it's the same thing I was talking about. Like if somebody can live with fake acoustic drums, I'll just use Addictive Drums and do it that way. But most of the stuff I've been doing has been just fully programmed, like trap beats, or or like everything now is it's a crossover. It's not necessarily trap music, but it's a pop song where they want like a trap beat.
Yeah, it's like a trap drums is on everything now.
Yeah, but I did just do something where they wanted like 80s like arena rock. So I layered some electronic sounds to kind of give it a little bit more of a modern take, but with the Black Velvet ad pack.
Yes.
Like that's that big massive stadium kit. So I think the preset in there is like bigger overhead in room or something. So it's just this big huge kit, and I'll just layer that with like a punchy electronic kick and like some hand claps or whatever. And so yeah, but it's been weird because like living in New York, we were talking about my schedule. Like one of the reasons I kept Vampire Hours, because it's like I could just work all night and it's quiet, and not just quiet on my street, but like quiet, like most people aren't calling me or texting me because everybody's asleep. So it would be easy for me to do 8 to 12-hour like programming runs every night. And out here it's very different. So it's like I've caught up on so many like Netflix shows recently, and I'm like, at first I was beating myself up. It's like, I'm not my usual productive self. And it's like, you know what? And like a lot of my friends have been saying the same thing. We've all been going nonstop for decades. And it's like, none of us ever felt okay about just taking time, like to slow down a little bit. So I'm definitely not working. I'm not sitting in front of my rig every day. Like,
I think you learn to work a lot smarter, and you forgive yourself for the personal time that you take. Because I find now when something is gnawing at me, like I have to do like an instrumental for a hip hop artist that I'm producing, and I'll know I have to do it, and it'll gnaw at me a little bit because I'm like, I have to do this. I need to sit down and do it, and then when I sit down and do it, it takes me an hour and a half. Yeah. Like literally an hour and a half, 2 hours, and it's banging just like anything else that might have taken me 4 hours in the past. Because I've worked it all out of my head already. Yeah. And taking the time off to like breathe and go do other things, like play chess with my kid and do I'm not really worried about it at this point. I think maybe now we realize that we're all at a skill level because we've been doing this long enough that it's really second nature, that when you sit down and you're focused to do it, you don't need all that extra time. The extra time, and that, for me, the late night working hours, you're one of the few people, why I make fun of it just because it's like you're a vampire, but you were one of the few people that I would know that actually would get stuff done on those hours. The biggest problem that I had with late night working with bands is that after 6:30, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, that's when I say basically booty and drugs come into play, or plans. So people will be at the studio and they're thinking about that girl or that guy that they want to get with later on that night, or they want to like get something like their drugs delivered, or they want all these things happen that aren't conducive to making good records. And the clock, you don't get as much work done when you're working with people. So I sort of took on this thing where like, if you want to work with me, I know it's your project, but unless like you're Sting or someone, you know what I mean? Like who's really going to tell me what to do. But unless like you're going to work normal hours with me, because we're going to get so much more done between 10 and 5 than you will if we work at 7. And then I'd find people would be very productive coming in. The schedule would get shorter and shorter and shorter from like 11 to 4 or 11 to 3. And we would still get a ton done. Yeah. And so, and the work that we would do would be so much better because it wasn't like trying to get an 8-hour session in. You'd be doing 3 hours of really succinct work and then say, look, I'll see you tomorrow. Just come in tomorrow. Let me work for a couple hours and engineer, So that's kind of good that it's changing for you because it's making you have a life.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, yeah, and you having kids, definitely you don't have the same like freedom to just like disappear But yeah, so there's certain projects. I definitely learned to work smarter over the years, and then also just like my approach to music became less and less is more. Like over the years, just in general, like all my favorite shit, I'm realizing that it's just like it's not overly done, and it's like overly seasoned. It's like fewer but better ingredients.
That's why reggae is a big influence on my production, because it's all about the space. The more space you can put into a production, the more timeless and the more easier it is on your ears, and the more it resonates with your soul. I really feel that's the truth. And so reggae is one of the few genres that I don't produce because it's such it's for me, it's my guilty pleasure just to listen to reggae records. But I take that information and I try to apply it to everything I'm doing. I want to do something with you that I do with everybody. I got a bunch of questions, rapid fire. But we only have 3 minutes left before they kick us off anyway.
Okay.
So just answer the questions. Don't overthink it. And I'm not. I don't respond to them. So here we go. Faith or science?
Science.
A club or festival?
Neither. Can I say
Ocean.
that?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want. Ocean, lake, or desert?
Depends on the ocean. Depends on the desert.
Acid or mushrooms?
Mushrooms, but I've never done either. But I want to do psilocybin now that it's about to be legal, like as therapy. Yeah. So yeah.
Big room or small room?
Depends on the sound I'm going for.
What's your superpower?
Having hypersenses, like it's called sensory processing sensitivity. Like everything is like too much. So it's a double-edged sword, but that's my superpower.
How would you incorrectly describe your job?
I don't even know. Like, that's how I'd incorrectly describe my job. I'm a drug dealer.
What animal should survive if only one can survive?
Yeah, that's the wolf. I don't know. Yeah.
If not music, then what?
Love.
Favorite meal?
Peanut butter.
Do you have hunter or gatherer?
Both.
Do you have a favorite deli?
Not anymore. You know, my diet is so rigid. Like, I don't do delis.
I have other questions, but I was going to say favorite metal band. But the last question before we get kicked off, what genre are the Talking Heads?
What genre of the Talking Heads? Oh, I just thought of them as their genre is just like mixed. But my favorite song is same as Once in a Lifetime by them. So whatever you would call that version.
Yes, I asked the same questions and everything, and everyone has a different answer for the Talking Heads. So one day I'm going to have David Byrne on here just so I can ask him the same question.
Yeah, you should. Yeah.
That's good. Well, thank you so much for doing this. You look great.
Yeah,
I can't wait to meet the new woman at some point when we're all out of our places. A dog is good on you.
Yeah, thanks, man.
I like that you have a dog now, man. I'll speak to you soon.
Okay, man.
Cheers. I'll speak to you soon. Well,